we've reached AI when something is produced by a human and something is produced by a machine, and a human judge can't tell which is which.
AI technology, and I'm not talking about artificial insemination. I'm talking about things like ChatGPT. Well, it's quickly risen to the surface in our vocabulary. What about in our understanding of it? Today, Mackenzie Burnett returns as our guest as she walks us through what it is, how it's being used, why all of a sudden are we seeing so and hearing so much about it, and how could you and I as ranchers use it?
I think the theme of what we've been talking about is it reduces the non-ranching expertise, or like the sort of core competency expertise that you need to run your business.
So when you hear that, do you feel threatened, or do you see this as potential?
All these things are not meant to necessarily replace the human. They're meant to supplement human instinct, where it should just be like a really helpful assistant.
AI technology and ranching. That's our topic today. A show dedicated to the curious, the believers, the doubters, the young'uns, the middle-aged, and the old-timers alike on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Hi, everyone, and we welcome you to another edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. Thanks for joining us on our program this week. Another great show. We'll get into that in just a few moments, but just a couple things I wanted to mention before we jump full bore into our topic here today. Number one is that if you do miss something on the show and you want to go back and listen to it, for those of you that might be new to the Working Ranch Radio Show, you can find all of our episodes, previous episodes, by going to our podcast site at workingranchradio.com or any podcast provider out there, whether it's Apple or Spotify, or there's a myriad of them out there. You can find our show on that, and you can subscribe and listen to it there. And I encourage you, if you hear something that kind of intrigues you a little bit, share it out on your social media. That's helpful. And also, if you leave comments on where you listen to it, that's helpful for us as well. The other thing I might add to that is if you hear something on the show that might beg for more questions, or you have a question about it and you would like us to bring that guest on, let me know. Or if there's been previous guests that you would like us to come back on the show and cover a specific topic that you're thinking of, send me an email, justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Be glad to do that. Or if you have questions for me that you would like me to answer, feel free. Send me an email. We appreciate that dialogue back and forth, because our show is here for you all. We want to make sure that we are covering topics that are useful and relevant to all of us here in the ranching industry. One more thing before we jump into our topic, and it's, I think it was back about the second or third week of January, I had on our show Trey Wasserberger. Now, we were talking about how things were coming along for Sustainable Beef LLC, which is the new packing plant that's being built in North Platte, Nebraska. In fact, I believe this month, from what I understand previously, doors are set to open on that. Now, I also mentioned him mainly because I know he and his wife Dana, they're going to be having their upcoming sale, TD Angus Most of the Best Spring Sale. That's going to be coming up on March 21st, selling about 400 head of spring and fall Angus bulls, plus some commercial females, and of course the ranch geldings that they've been working on as well. That sale is going to be held at the ranch near North Platte, Nebraska. If you want to find out more information, go to their website at tdangus.com, and that'll get you hooked up with if you need to get a hold of Trey, or if you'd like a sale catalog as well. All right, let's jump into our subject here today, and that is AI technology in ranching. And I know when I say that, for some of you, you're going to think, well, I'm going to check out here because I'm either not sure about AI technology, I don't understand AI technology, I think it's spooky, I think it's scary, various different things like that. Or you think, well, that's only for the young folks that are going to be moving in. Here's the deal. I encourage each and every person, no matter your age, your demographic, what you're doing, how big your ranch size is, how small your ranch size is, doesn't matter. I think you will find our conversation that we have on AI technology and ranching extremely useful. Now, my conversation today is going to be with Mackenzie Burnett, who, if you're familiar, we had Mackenzie on a month or so ago, as she is the CEO and co-founder of Ambrook, which is an accounting software that we were talking with her about, is talking about how they've come along and how they designed that with really kind of the agricultural industry and that concept in mind. But in my conversations with Mackenzie following that interview, I realized she was also extremely knowledgeable article about AI technology, and I felt like it would be very important for us in the ranching industry to see, while we've heard about bits and pieces of where AI technology might be at, how could it be used for you and I, for everyday ranchers like you and I? Where could it be used? How could it be used? Is there any concerns with it? All of those kinds of questions that I think a lot of us have when it comes to AI technology. So with that in mind, I welcome back to our show Mackenzie Burnett, CEO and co-founder of Ambrook. And Mackenzie, it's good to have you back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Yeah, it's great to be back. Thanks, Justin.
Well, Mackenzie, the last time you were on here, you and I got into conversation after we got done with our interview, and we were talking about the subject and the use of AI technology in ranching. And of course, at that particular time, it was a topic that I was researching a little bit myself and wanting to cover here on the program because I thought it would be very relevant for a lot of us in ranching. And I know it seems like AI technology, in terms of what we think in our minds it is, might be a long ways away from ranching, but we're hearing so much about it in our mainstream media. And at the time, I really wasn't quite sure who I could talk to about it. And the more you and I got to talking, I realized you had definitely a working knowledge of it. But in addition to that, also understand agriculture enough to know where you could potentially see it happening. And we're going to get into that later on in the show. But I think to just get started, first and foremost, just give us a background, kind of what it is, how it works, where it started from, and where we're seeing it being used in our society today.
Yeah, totally. So AI, and in this context, when I say AI, I mean artificial intelligence.
Yeah. That's a good call. That is good. We probably better make sure we clarify that when we even title this show, because everybody's going to think we're talking about artificial insemination. But yes, good call. Good catch on that one.
So the concept of AI isn't new, right? You've had the idea of, I think humans have been obsessed with the idea of thinking machines for a very long time. And, there's a very famous concept called the Turing test, which was a thought experiment from Alan Turing in the mid 20th century, which is basically this idea that, we've reached AI when something is produced by a human and something is produced by a machine, and a human judge can't tell which is which.
Okay.
And I think we've probably pretty surely passed that, especially in the last couple of years. And so now the big question is, okay, well, it's not just AI, it's AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, right? Which is kind of this new, this different standard, which is that the intelligence a machine possesses has the ability to understand or learn sort of any intellectual task that a human being can. And maybe we're not quite there yet, but we are certainly there for, a lot of different categories of things like writing or image recognition. And I think the thing that you and I were kind of talking about before that I thought would be useful to touch on is, I think, why is it suddenly working now? Like what kind of changed in the past couple of years if humans have been trying to build thinking machines for hundreds of years for a very long time? And there's basically three main factors, and you don't actually need to go into a super technical explanation for it, right? So like three main factors. The first is that AI is kind of like, it's pattern recognition at a massive scale. So it's the same type of pattern recognition that human intelligence does, and that's sort of what learning is like you kind of see one thing and you learn from it, and you get sort of a feedback loop. And you just imagine that that's done at a millions and millions of data point scale. And so basically what happened is that the internet happened, and suddenly we have these massive data sets that these AI models can train against. And it's not just the internet, but it's the digitization of all these paper records. And so, and the internet basically makes it really easy to share all that. And so these AI models have been trained against essentially the internet. And it turns out that was actually big enough to be able to start to get the results back that we're starting to see. The second thing that changed is just way more computing power. So basically just advances in what's called cloud computing, which is basically instead of just having a server that's in your house, which is like how, Facebook was originally run on a couple of servers in someone's house in Palo Alto, right? Now it's kind of run in the cloud. The cloud is basically just thousands of servers in a data center somewhere. So it's just way more of that, as if it's not in someone's house, it's in a data center. And that's sort of what the cloud is. And so there's the idea that you can have multiple, you can build out these big data centers, and that the servers themselves are a lot more powerful. So they're built with these specialized computing chips that are just, way more powerful than what we had before, that let these AI models run a lot more efficiently. Mm-hmm. And then the last component, so it's big data, more computing power. And the last component is just way better algorithms. And so there were, about a bunch of computer scientists and researchers worked really hard on iterating through a bunch of different algorithms and kind of came across a couple of methodologies that started to work really well and that made AI a lot better at things like language understanding or image processing or prediction. And so those three things together basically came together over the past 3 years. And that's where you're sort of, and they're still seeing breakthroughs. And so there are still things like that are coming out. But as of right now, that is generally the gist of why now and what's been going on.
Yeah. Because honestly, while those in more tech type businesses or have needed or used tech probably have been a little bit more in seeing it coming a little sooner. But it just has really felt in the last 8 to 10 months. It's just like, bloop, we just flipped a switch and that's all we hear about, isn't it?
Totally. It feels like it's come out of nowhere. Whereas before it was sort of, a group, some groups in San Francisco that were, really obsessed with it. And I think there's actually a lot of tools that have made it a lot more accessible. So, ChatGPT, for example, is a really common one that people know and oftentimes even equate with AI. Like the actual, ChatGPT is built on what's called a foundation model called GPT. And that is built by a company called OpenAI, and which was recently sort of invested in by Microsoft. They have kind of a weird relationship or an unusual relationship because technically OpenAI is different entity structure. But I think it's actually a really interesting sign that actually for the most people, they just think of, when they think of AI, they kind of equate that with ChatGPT. And I think that says a lot about how easy to use tools are actually really important for making this type of technology really accessible and able to be used and understood by a lot more people than just like that small group in San Francisco.
Yeah. I want to go down just a quick little road here, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds on it, but it is a terminology that we hear a lot about. And it's probably, actually, I think more people were familiar with hearing the terminology algorithm long before they heard of AI. So real quickly, can you just kind of, from maybe break it down to me as a fifth grader, algorithm. I mean, I think we all understand that it's some programming in there that's definitely doing a lot of the heavy lifting and determining where things are going on the internet or coming to you and vice versa. Break it down for me.
Yeah, totally. So an algorithm it's basically just like a step-by-step set of instructions for solving a problem or performing a task. So it's kind of like a recipe.
Okay.
And so when you cook, you're using an algorithm. You can kind of think about that. And that particular recipe and the steps that you take, so it's not just the ingredients, but it's also the way that you use the ingredients can determine the output of that recipe. And so if you do everything perfectly, then you'll have a really great cake. But if you forget an ingredient or you cook it too long or whatever, like it's kind of like that's bugs in software. It's
Okay.
like, it's running an algorithm, but the output might not be exactly what you wanted. And so when we talk about like algorithms with AI, there are these terms like, which we don't have to get into, but like when you hear deep learning or reinforcement learning or like transformer models, which is ChatGPT, those are just simply like fancy, they're types of algorithms that people used, kind of invented to kind of make it a lot easier for these machines to kind of learn from data sets or learn from their past actions or get feedback loops so that they could essentially get way better at pattern recognition. So when you're typing into something into ChatGPT and it's like writing back, really all it's doing is it's just getting really good at predicting the next word that it should write. And it does that because it's like learned on like millions and millions of data points, right? That it just makes it's a really good prediction machine.
Okay. So I think now's a good time. We'll take a break. And when we come back, we're going to continue on. I'm wanting to continue to set a kind of a base understanding of really what AI technology is before we start looking at more about really how it can be used in ranching. And I know this might seem a little bit mundane to talk about some of these things, but we're going to get there. And I encourage you to stay with us. We'll be back on the Work and Ranch Radio Show after this. This segment today brought to you by Vigortone.
Support your cattle's health and productivity with Vigortone minerals. Since 1912, Vigortone has been a trusted name in animal nutrition, Our revitalized product line offers targeted nutrition for every stage of production and every region. Vigortone delivers consistent performance and simplifies your mineral decisions. Wherever you are, Vigortone works. Visit Vigortone.com to learn more.
Mackenzie, in the last segment, as you were explaining to us what AI technology is, one of the things, as you were talking about the 3 reasons why we're seeing a lot more of it being talked about here today, was because AI is really a pattern recognition. That's really what it is. And we're seeing the computing power, the ability to see more records being digitized. And so my question is this, in regards to the pattern recognition, what patterns is it looking at? So my question is, in regards to the patterns and the data that it's looking at, from what sources?
Yeah. So, and this is actually where a lot of folks are getting upset. So like the New York Times has a big lawsuit against OpenAI because essentially these models were trained on all public information on the internet.
Sure.
And so it was trained on, and actually probably some private, paid walls or like private information too, right? And actually, technically there were these boundaries, right, that American companies were trying to follow around because they didn't want people, to get into copyright law violations or any of that. But folks are kind of questioning, okay, like, did you train on my data, because that's, the New York Times paid a lot of money to create those articles and put them out. But a reason I've heard why people think DeepSeek is so much better at creative writing is that potentially, they didn't care as much about global copyright law and just like we're able to train on like every book in history. And so I think that is sort of what it's learning from, is just it's able to recognize, the relationships and correlations and trends in like Shakespeare's prose and, every public research paper that was ever written, and like understand how words are structured. And it's seen like all historical price data, or transaction records or economic trends, right? And it can kind of have what looks like a lot more context, basically. And so that's why when you're writing to ChatGPT, you're essentially querying the entire internet. And that's essentially what it's giving back.
Okay. So let's now talk about where you have used it. And keep in mind, of course, we had you on the show a while back. You're the CEO and co-founder of Ambrook, and an accounting type software, some various things with that. And of course, everybody can say, okay, well, you're in technology or you're in software. I could see some elements of that being used. So first of all, maybe explain how you have used it, and from that standpoint, and how it has helped in what you're doing.
Yeah. So actually, before I talk about how I use it, I'll just kind of talk about, there's, I think, 2 categories of use you can kind of think about when it, and so when it comes to like, business owners or like building businesses in the age of AI. And the first is, what am I using AI for as a business owner to make my own business easier to run or more efficient or anything like that? And what is my team using the same thing? And then the second category is business models built around AI. So like being able to spin up an app without ever having a background in software engineering. Like that is something that many people are doing now, right? Like you can basically just ask ChatGPT or Claude or any of the other permutations of it from competing companies to essentially walk you through how to code. And so there, on one hand, you kind of have like, how am I making my own business more efficient? But then the larger implication of that is, I think, the second category, which is, what is the world that we're going to be competing in as business owners for AI native businesses versus not? And I think that AI native businesses, really easy, I think, to see on the software side, but I think you're also going to see AI native branches.
Okay.
I'll
ask you about, I might ask you about that a little bit more. So, okay, go ahead.
But and we can kind of talk through what that would look like. But basically the first is kind of, you can think about in the individual context. And then the second is like, what is the competitive, if I can do this, what is someone who's like super fluent in it and like going to be thinking about it in every part of their business? What is that competitive landscape going to look like? And I think especially in cattle ranching and like the whole cattle supply chain, if you're playing in a commodity market, you need to have every edge, every edge you can. And so thinking about that, I think, is something that we think about, as a software company, but it's true across any different type of business.
Mm-hmm. I know you and I have been in discussion about how you have used it with Ambrook in your company and building your company and continuing to expand, which is one of the huge, when it's in software companies, if you're not growing, you're dying, probably would be my guess.
Totally.
And then I can talk a little bit about how just on a very basic level, I've used it, but just from your side of things, how are you using it?
Yeah, totally. So I switch between like ChatGPT and Claude, kind of the two that I switch back, and they're both, chat interfaces. Claude is built by Anthropic, which is a competitor, actually like a spin out sort of from OpenAI, which builds ChatGPT. And they're kind of good at different things a little bit. But I have those windows open like every day in my browser, and I'm constantly turning to it to like, summarize an article for me or help me brainstorm through something. And I think there's different levels basically of like the models you can select with these different interfaces. So if you kind of, if you ever use ChatGPT and you can kind of see like, oh, there's all these different models, which one should I use? Like some of them are really good and meant for deep research. And those queries take a while. And some of them are really good for like very simple like queries or tasks. So I'll have one of my tabs going and just doing like deep research on, like something that I want to learn about, like walk me through the history of like feedlots in the United States over the past 50 years. Or like I'll have some deep research doing like as if I have like a research assistant 24/7, just like constantly like, writing papers for me. Like that's sort of one aspect. And then the other aspect is just these quick one-off tasks. Like I'll copy and paste something in and be like, summarize this, or I'll write a really quick draft of an email I want to send. And we'll be like, hey, can you make this more straightforward or something? And that's another sort of everyday use case that I'm using. And then for more like specialized or one-off tasks, like when I'm fundraising, for example, or when I'm like having to do a legal review of some document, I'll basically throw the whole document in there and basically be like, pull out are the terms that I should highlight with my counsel to ask questions about so that I know whether or not I want to bring it up as a point of negotiation. That's sort of another example that I have used in the past.
Well, and I think that correlates very similar to how I've used it as well myself. Of course, I'm just getting kind of more aware of it here in the last 6 months or so, where I know you've used it a lot longer than that. But for me, it's been basically a very extensive and a very robust search mechanism that helps me to find data, to understand, or even have to explain data. Those kinds of things have been useful. So let's take a break here. When we continue on, we've still got a lot more to talk about. We're yet to really get into how we could see AI in ranching. We're getting there. We'll continue on, and if we don't get it all in today, we will get it into next week's show as well. So stick with us. We'll be back on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
With rising feed costs and an increased focus on sustainability within the beef industry, feed efficiency is more than a buzzword. It's rapidly becoming a battle cry in an industry challenged to do more with less. By incorporating today's Limousine and Limflex genetics into your planned crossbreeding program, you can capitalize on the breed's inherent feed efficiency advantage and moderate cow size, while still banking the premiums paid for high-quality, high-yielding carcasses. That's 2 ways to profit instead of 1. Let Limousine and Limflex deliver dollars to your bottom line. Limousine today, profit tomorrow.
I know the cold temperatures of this last winter probably etched in your memory, and you're still thinking about it, and we continue to see wintry weather across the country. And when all of that's going on, it is hard to be thinking about things like fly control. Yeah, but nevertheless, now is a good time to get serious about horn fly control for this year. And with SmartLick tubs that are fortified with Alticid, Feed-Through Fly Control is really one of the most convenient and proven supplement solutions that are available to cattle producers. Now, Alticid, as we know, works by breaking the life cycle of those horn flies. SmartLick with Alticid should be fed 30 days before the last frost of this spring throughout the warm months, and then 30 days after the first frost in the fall. It's not just another tub. It's proven fly control. So don't wait. Visit smartlick.com to find out more information. Again, that's smartlic.com. Well, as we continue on, our subject here today is continuing to look at how AI technology could be used in the ranching industry. My guest is Mackenzie Burnett. Now, coincidentally, she's actually the CEO and co-founder of Ambrook, but also somebody who I have used as a resource to help me to understand AI technology, its uses, and where we could potentially see it being used in agriculture. So that's why I invited Mackenzie to be here on our program. I want to look into one other realm that I have used it in, and I know we're continuing to see it more and more, and that is in the world of creativity. For example, the last year and a half or so, I have used an element of AI technology to help in editing and working through this show. And so that's kind of how I've used it. But as far as like from the creativity side of things, what are your thoughts on some of the AI technology on that?
Yeah. So I think that there are a couple of different ways in which, actually, the reason why I'm hesitating is I wanted to prove the creativity thing. So I asked ChatGPT, write me a short poem for Justin Mills, the host of Working Ranch podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll just read you the first stanza. But like, on the range where the big herds roam, a voice rides strong through the airwaves dome. Justin Mills, with a steady drawl, brings ranching stories to one and all.
And you're a poet. There you go.
And I think that that's like, it's just delightful. I think there's a lot of stuff that it can do. So not just we've talked a lot about chatbots. There's the other thing the other early use case that has become super prominent is image recognition and generation. So similar with similar as language, these AI models have been able to do incredible things with images, and not just 2D images, like 3D, CAD drawings as well. And it's similar because like what are images, but just like relationships between pixels. Same thing as what is language, but just like relationships between letters. And so images are just a series of pattern recognition. And so it's some really interesting stuff like text to image has become really popular, where you can kind of describe something, and it's made it way easier to design video games and to do like engineering, sort of build CAD files that used to be super onerous to build. And our design team uses it to like get ideas for ads, that we want to run or something like that. And I think that there's a lot there as well that have become a tool. So similarly, you can become a software engineer without ever being a software engineer. You can become an artist without having, an artistic bone in your body if you're good at describing stuff, Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, I could see that. And that's me. It's like, I'm not what I would call, I didn't really enjoy art in school, even growing up, but it allows me to be, do some creative things that are out of my wheelhouse that still has some professional look to them. So I could see that. Okay. You used a little bit ago, you said AI native ranches, and I know we've got a lot more stuff I want to talk about here, and we're probably going to spread this over 2 shows to, our discussion here today. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time to get to some of those, because I think just as folks are listening, there's also concern. I mean, we also keep in mind, we're dealing with an industry and people that are within an industry that are pretty conservative by nature, and might trust their neighbors and might trust their friends. But when it comes to this kind of stuff, there's totally some concern there. We'll get to that. But before we do that, let's talk through this terminology that you used a little bit about AI native ranches, because I think the one thing where I'm looking at is, okay, how do we use this in ranching? Because so far, everything you've talked about, there's a lot of people probably saying, well, that's not really for me. I don't see it happening. But what do you see going down the road?
Yeah. So I think a really important thing to keep in mind is that, and the way that we think about it as well, even when we're designing like AI workflows into Ambrook, so, being able to suggest, bookkeeping categories, or being able, you should be able to ask your books, like, what was how much money did I make from this enterprise last year? And you should be able to ask it similar to you do a chatbot, right? You should be able to ask, your software, and it should be able to query it and come back to you with an accurate response. I think that a big part is that it reduces, I think the theme of what we've been talking about is it reduces the ranching expertise, or like the sort of like core competency expertise that you need to run your business. But I think an important part of that is that it's AI today is really good at drafting it's really good at being the assistant, but it's not that great at what we call like the last mile, which is basically connecting all the dots at the very end, as of right now. And this, again, we date stamp this, like, I don't think that most people think it will fully replace humans, especially humans who need to work in the physical world for a very, very, very long time. There's a lot of problems you need to solve in order to be able to get there. And in fact, actually, what a lot of people in tech are worried about is that more people in tech are worried about, like, the knowledge workers, like more people there are worried about their jobs. And they actually are, like, there's a lot of commentary about how physical world jobs are actually safer. Because it's a lot harder to replace. And so I think when I was kind of using this term of like AI native ranches, it's the same thing of like, what's an AI native startup today? It's like a startup that's being built by a whole crop of like college students, right? Where it's just is so fluent and they're just pulling and using AI tools and building stuff in a way that is a lot, like, uses all these tools in a lot more native way. But I think, like, when it comes to, and I think the difference is, there's a difference, I think, between using a tool one-off and like integrating AI in every part of the business. And that's what I mean by like AI native ranches. So like you're looking at things like more automated livestock management. So those collars you were kind of talking about, that is giving, with the potential to give feedback back about like how the health of an animal. Imagine if you had, I know this might be a scary world to some people. So it's like, I'm not advocating for this, but imagine if you had like, like AI powered cameras that were scanning herds, and you had, the virtual fencing that like automatically moved based on like weather information that was coming in, right? And then you also had monitors that understood sort of like the grass levels. And all these things aren't not meant to necessarily replace the human. They're meant to supplement human instinct, where it should just be like a really helpful assistant, that's kind of like doing a lot of things. We're already moving toward that world with a lot of virtualization of like, virtual fences, I think, is a common one, like automated tractors have been around for a while, but like you can imagine how if you extend that to its like logical conclusion, what would that world look like? And it's not that far away.
Yeah. Well, and I know in my discussion with you after we had done our interview a few weeks ago, or probably a month or so ago, I should say, when you were telling us about Ambrook and you were talking about what you were using it for. And I was just telling you, just from what I saw, and it echoes kind of what you were talking about here a little bit, is that it is that very productive assistant that can go do some things for you. And for example, one of the things that I shared with you was working on a business plan for how we were going to maybe try to make another ranch location that we have look at a whole different type, instead of being production agriculture, maybe looking at agritourism on that ranch because of its location in the Black Hills of Wyoming. And in my head, I'd been fighting for 2 years how to come up with a business plan of how to do that. And I'm sitting in a meeting the first time I hear about AI. This is crazy. I was sharing the story the other day with my cousin too, where we were on the phone talking about some of this stuff. I'm sitting in a meeting and I have a Windows Surface tablet. So I go into ChatGPT, I type in, and I put in the parameters, the prompts, and was very descriptive with the prompts. And in like 30 to 45 seconds, I had a draft of a business plan that I mean, absolutely blew my socks off. And it even had things in there, startup costs, things like that I didn't even put in. And I was just flabbergasted. And I look at that and I see, from a business standpoint, I've continued to push. And I know you guys have sent some folks to Ranching for Profit. One of the things that we talk about is running our ranches like a business, which means we need to put some business mind into what we're doing as a ranch. And that's some time in the office, whether that's various different things. This just took a job that was probably could have taken me, 12 hours to do. And I had it done in 45 seconds. The first draft. And totally. I think that's something to come back to. This isn't the final project, but it gets stuff done. And that's where my initial thoughts in ranching is some of those kinds of things. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right. And I think we work with this with our customers all the time, right? There's a hesitancy to apply for that grant or to write, and because you need to like write that, write the grant, or you need to like come up with your, your business plan, or maybe you want to kind of like redo your branding, or, all this sort of stuff. And I think the thing that people have grabbed historically is like, a consultant or a family member or someone who they either pay or, they like is in the local space of just any warm body, that's like willing to do that in draft. And I think this is kind of just a way cheaper, and, it's free for a lot of these models, and a way more high quality way to like shortcut a lot of that for folks so that they're not blocked on that, so they can actually, because most people are fine. Like once you have a drafted business plan, you can get excited, and you can do edits. And I use it all the time for the stuff that we do as well. And I think that it moves people forward way faster and makes ideas possible in a way that I'm honestly really excited. And I think a big passion of mine has been in talking to a lot of our customers. Like I want to help all of our customers understand how to use this technology, because I really genuinely think it will help them reach their goals and the vision that they have for their businesses in a way that they might have told themselves stories that they weren't good at, or, might not be possible.
Mm-hmm. So let's take a pause here. When we come back, we're going to continue on talking just a little bit more about some of the potential practical uses that we could be using AI technology in ranching. We'll get into that after the break.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer influenced females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer genetics.
So I want to continue and pick up a little bit more in terms of talking about the using of it to cover some of the professional things that we sometimes need to do as ranchers. Estate management, that's a big thing. Estate management is big in ranching because it costs a lot of money to get it put into a trust like it should be, or however you want to do that, and those kinds of things. And I think that stops a lot of people from starting down that road. And it's not meant, and I say this because I know I've had some great attorneys on our show here that have been very enlightening in some of the stuff and helping us work through those. But at the same time, I think as families too, there's a lot of cost in that. Is there ways that this can maybe not put so the attorneys aren't having to come up everything from scratch, where they can, we as a rancher, as a family, can really kind of go into those meetings with an attorney to get that final draft that needs to be done by an attorney, but yet we're productive with our time when we're having those meetings with those professional services?
I think absolutely the answer is yes. I think and I'll talk about all the ways I think that definitely is a great use case. I think today, and just some conversations that I've had with lawyers, like right now, like ChatGPT isn't great. It can like spit out something that looks like legalese, but if a lawyer reads it, it's kind of a little bit gobbledygook or whatever. It's honestly, there are some things it's fine for, like terms of service on a website or something, because it can pattern match against that. I think the real answer to something like a template, it probably can take a template, because these things are fairly standard, right? Like setting up, doing estate planning, and there's probably a template that any lawyer that would be doing it is using, right? You probably can stick in a template and it can help you edit it. I think the best actually thing is what you said around feeling prepared going into that meeting. And so maybe you have a template and you've like stuck that in, and ChatGPT has basically told you, here's all the questions you should be asking. Or maybe actually it also is, I think there's a big thing with estate planning is not just the final end state, but it's all of the family discussion that goes into that. And so maybe actually it's also really good at basically being like, here are all of the conversation. Here's a set of conversations that you should be having as a family, and things that you should be agreeing on or ahead of going into conversation, maybe even playing a little bit of therapist, because I think it's kind of this neutral third party that's like a robot, and so if like the robot is asking you hard questions, it's kind of like there's no emotion in that.
It's not biased. Yeah. It's not
biased.
Yeah. It's not an edge. It's not asking you with a ill intent in the background.
Totally. And so I think actually that is where I see it being really interesting, is essentially playing this kind of neutral third party voice that is getting families to have hard conversations in a way that actually ends up being really productive, so that you're going into this like final meeting with an attorney with like an understanding of what the paperwork should look like, an understanding of all of the hard questions that you had to like think about, and understanding what all the steps are, right? So you can also go in and be like, I kind of, know how much this should cost, or like how much time it should take, or those types of things. Those are all things that I think are a great use case for that.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I see is, and we've definitely seen it more so in the last several years, of more ranchers taking on some mechanism. Now I don't. I mean, I sell commodity products, so I just sell calves, and that's pretty much it. However, folks that are wanting to sell maybe farm to table, or have their own meat shop, or have their own freezer beef type situation like that, the ability for creative to all of those kinds of things, that's really something that's probably, it's really right in the wheelhouse of AI technology. Is that what you're seeing too?
Yeah, totally. There are lots of, actually very similar to like what we were talking about. There are some artists who are like, don't want anything to do with AI. And there are some artists who have like fully embraced it as a tool to be able to help their work and help the creative process. And I think for folks who wouldn't describe themselves as artistic, or like, don't know all of the different digital tools that you could use to create a brand, like it's a really great way to like create something quick that otherwise maybe you'd have to go on a like an Upwork or another one of these like work marketplaces and ask a random stranger freelancer to like create a logo for you. And maybe that's the logo that you have, but you don't really like it, and I think that's that's like, you can make them for free now in ways that I think would help a lot of people out.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to put a pause in it for this week, and we will pick up next week where we are leaving off here as we continue to talk with Mackenzie Burnett, who's coincidentally the CEO and co-founder of Ambrook, but kind of somebody that I've leaned on to help walk me through and give me more understanding about AI technology and its uses. We'll pick up where we left off last week, talking more about it. A little bit more talking about its uses in agriculture and in ranching, but also we're going to jump into some of the other conversations that come up with it as well. For example, can I trust it? The data with it, how is that being secured? Just all of those kinds of conversations that come up as well, in addition to things that also lead to more about some morality and moral issues as we continue to see AI technology expand. Will it get to that point to where we have concerns with that? Maybe folks already do. That's part of the depth and the breadth of our conversation next week, so be sure to tune in as we wrap up our conversation with Mackenzie about the use of AI technology in ranching. Stay with us after the break. Meteorologist Don Day steps in for this week's edition of our long-term weather.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the WeatherStationExperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit MeasureRain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to MeasureRain.com.
And turning now, let's take a look at our long-term weather. Joining us, as he does each and every week, almost each and every week, I should say, Don, is meteorologist Don Day. And it's been a few weeks since we have been able to catch up. I've been extremely busy. And so with that, as we look into, now we're here in the middle of March and looking out ahead of that, it's just, as we were talking before we started here today, kind of just typical March weather is what we're seeing across the country.
Yeah, we're seeing some ups and downs. We've had a recent outbreak of severe weather. That's a real sign that you're changing seasons. And also, we've been able to finally get some precipitation in parts of the southwestern United States, Arizona, a lot of the Great Basin states and the Four Corners region able to pick up some moisture. California over this past week has picked up some really good moisture. So we're kind of seeing some of the dry areas of the central and west getting some opportunities now that we weren't seeing in January or February. But there's still some very dry holes across different parts of the country that we hope the rest of March and into April we'll start to have some of those holes get hit with some of these storms.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's where everybody's at. Definitely going through these storms. When livestock, we got a lot of calves on the ground, things like that is definitely not really where we want to be at. At the same time, we are needing moisture. So as we continue to look through this, are things lining up with what you expected? I know we pretty much closed the door on La Nina and moving on with that.
Yeah, it's gone, and the water temperatures out in the East Central and Eastern Pacific are really warming up. There's still some cold water out there that in the weeks ahead will completely fade away, but yeah, we don't really need to talk about it anymore. So what we'll be talking about is the Pacific going into a neutral state, and that should, if history is a lesson here, that should lead to more opportunities for the rest of this month, rest of March, April, and May. Coast to coast, there will be several opportunities for spring storms. And we also have the third stratospheric warming event of the winter season that's taking place right now. There's always a lag. Mm-hmm. And that warming event up in the higher latitudes will allow colder air to still escape out of Canada and the polar regions, even into the month of April. So while we are certainly enjoying some warmer temperatures, we're not necessarily done with cold shots. Nothing severe, but enough to keep an eye on, especially folks who have got livestock calving operations, lambing operations going on. Kind of need to stay on your toes for the next 8 weeks, in my opinion.
So do you see anything real drastic with this third stratospheric event taking place that's going to be potentially a major spring storm?
What I do think it'll help produce is a lot of stormy weather in the North Pacific that will go across the Pacific Northwest and into the Central Rockies and Plains. And usually what happens is that one of these, what you tend to do is you get a combination of fast-moving, small to moderate-sized storms, and then about every 2 weeks you'll tend to get a larger, slower-moving storm. And that is something that I certainly think is on the table that covers a large geographic area and tends to be more impactful. Now, it's that double-edged sword you were alluding to. It's going to bring, hopefully, needed precipitation in many areas, but could cause some concerns on just day-to-day operations. Hopefully, we'll have good advance warning on those. But I think the opportunity for some large spring storms in the lower 48 and southern Canada this spring is higher than it was a year ago.
Okay. All right. Well, Don, appreciate the update as always, and very useful for us in agriculture. We'll talk with you next week.
Sounds good.
And if you are a daily weather watcher, like really a lot of us are in agriculture, that's kind of more of a joke to say that because we all in agriculture really watch it quite keenly. But nevertheless, if you want to tune in each and every morning to Don Day's weather forecast, you can find that his YouTube channel by going to his website at dayweather.com. And while you're there, also, if you browse on his website, maybe there's weather instruments, rain gauges, things like that you might be interested in picking up before this year starts. You can order those online from him, and if you have any questions, feel free to give him a holler as well. Stay with us. We'll put a wrap on this week's show after this.
Calving season is a favorite time of year, but along with that special time are dangers, extra stress, and increased labor. Safety Zone calf catchers are all about safety and making processing new calves easier. Designed for ATVs or UTVs, one person can do the job and never be threatened by the protective mother cow. Make this and every calving season safer and easier with a Safety Zone calf catcher. Watch videos and customer testimonials or order yours today at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914. Affordable and made in the USA. Make your upcoming and all future calving seasons safer, easier, and stress-free. Durable and designed to work anywhere you can drive your ATV or UTV. Order online at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914 today.
With rising feed costs and an increased focus on sustainability within the beef industry, feed efficiency is more than a buzzword. It's rapidly becoming a battle cry in an industry challenged to do more with less. By incorporating today's Limousine and Limflex genetics into your planned crossbreeding program, you can capitalize on the breed's inherent feed efficiency advantage and moderate cow size, while still banking the premiums paid for high-quality, high-yielding carcasses. That's 2 ways to profit instead of 1. Let Limousine and LimFlex deliver dollars to your bottom line. Limousine today, profit tomorrow.
Just a final comment here in regards to our topic this week that will continue on into next week as we're talking about the use of AI technology in ranching. Now, I know if folks listening, you think, well, man, I've been using some element of AI technology in my ranch or farm for quite some time. And that is true. It's absolutely true. I think the focus, really what we were talking about here today with it, is how you, from a management standpoint, can be using it in your ranch business. And as it continues to be more a part of our industry, how that's going to grow. And do we get on the boat? Do we get off the boat? How do we ride that ship out? And I think for each person in their own, they need to make that decision on their own. That's not something that, in my point of view, I'm trying to sway people one way or the other than this. It's just, I know that one of the things I continue to push as ranchers is that we need to be profit-minded, business-minded, family-minded, keep those goals in mind of where we want to be, what we want to be with our ranching operation. And if we can use some of these tools to be a little bit more efficient and still maintain where we want to be at with the use of some of this technology, then I think that's the opportunity that's there. By no means forcing anybody to make that decision to do what the other guy does, to each his own. And that's the great thing about living in the United States, is that we all have that freedom to make those decisions. So we'll continue with part 2 next week with Mackenzie as we talk about AI technology use in ranching. Well, before we go, just a couple things I wanted to mention in regard to Working Ranch Magazine. First of all, the March issue is already out, and the April issue, they are working on that, and be looking for that coming in your mailbox here shortly. But something else was that Working Ranch Magazine, of course, has a Facebook page. Every Friday, the Captain Tim O'Byrne, editor of Working Ranch Magazine, will just post the question, hey, folks, what's going on in your world? Of course, he usually does it way more clever than I just said it there. He'll have something that kind of sparks everybody's attention. But, I really like that, because I think not only is it good to see what's going on in other folks' world all across the country here, and to hear that and even see some of the pictures that are out there, that's always great too. But also, I think it also brings us together as we are all in this together as ranchers. And I think that's always a good thing. Sometimes we're divided on different issues, but when we can come together and just see that we're all humans, we all are all in the business of trying to create a good and safe, wholesome product at the beef industry, and a part of that in so many different ways and fashions. And for each different folks, they do it in different ways. And again, back to what I said a little bit ago, here in the United States and here in America and Canada, we have that ability to make those choices, and we celebrate those freedoms. So check out the Facebook page of Working Ranch Magazine. Every Friday morning, the captain kicks that question out, and I encourage you to participate in that. Post your own pictures out there. Say what's going on in your neck of the woods. We appreciate that. And speaking of that, that's also a good way to get ready to go for the weekend. Of course, the Working Ranch radio show kicks out on the weekend as well. You can catch that through radio or on podcast, and we sure appreciate you tuning in. Like I said earlier in the show as well, if you have an idea for a show topic, please do not hesitate at all. Send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. We'd sure like to cover any shows or questions or topics you would like us to cover. Quick thank you to our sponsors here today, the American Gelbvieh Association, Vigortone Minerals, the North American Limousine Foundation, and Smart Lick Tubs fortified with Alticid. Get a jump on fly control this year with Smart Lick Tubs with Alticid in them. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. I'm Justin Mills. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.